Hello. Welcome to this Bible study for our Sunday school lesson for Sunday, June 28th. Today we're in the book of Nehemiah. The last 3 weeks we have been studying from the book of Ezra. And when we began Ezra, the first exiles were returning to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Today, as we study the book of Nehemiah, almost 100 years have passed, and it's a situation of necessity to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Let's take a look at chapter 1 in the book of Nehemiah, and we'll look at different portions throughout chapters 1 and 2. I feel like the Sunday school lesson from your quarterly book is very well written, as are the this week's Reflecting God devotionals. So I hope that you have read all of those. It helps give you a complete picture of what this lesson can mean for you. Verse 1, chapter 1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. Now, considering Nehemiah and his father and what we know, it would appear that neither Nehemiah nor his father had ever been to Jerusalem to live there. Perhaps they were probably born in Babylon, had lived through their entire lives in this area under the leadership of the Persian king. So whatever feelings we're about to see that Nehemiah expresses about God and about Jerusalem had to have been passed down from generation to generation, from grandparents, great-grandparents. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Now, even though Nehemiah has never lived in Jerusalem, it's not where he was born, it's still a holy place in his mind and in his heart because of the instructions he has received in the faith from his family handed down through generations. You see, Jerusalem, where the Jewish people, that's the holy city, if the walls are in disrepair and the gates are broken down, that's a symbol. That's a symbol that their God is disgraced. That's an embarrassment to their God. That's a symbol that God's security and strength is not with them in the eyes of surrounding people. So this is very significant to Nehemiah, and he literally, like Ezra, is grieving in his prayer. You can read verses 5 through 12 in the first chapter of Nehemiah, and you can read his prayer where he reminds God of his covenant promise to the people. Towards the end of his prayer, he says, "Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man being Artaxerxes, the king of Persia." Since some time has passed since our last study, Cyrus is no longer the king. Artaxerxes is the king. Nehemiah and Ezra were contemporaries. Later in the book, we will see that they are in Jerusalem at the same time. Nehemiah states, "I was cupbearer to the king." That doesn't mean he just carried a cup of drink to the king. He would taste it. He would make sure the king's wine and food was not poisoned. But his job went way beyond that. It was a job of distinction, a job of leadership. He would oversee many people who tended to the vineyards, who produced the wine, who ordered the food, he would oversee its preparation. And cupbearers were in the presence of the king as they served them, they were always expected to have a cheerful countenance. They would not show their own emotions. And they were often listeners to the king, like advisors, very close personal listeners and advisors. Now, based on what we're told in verse 1, the month of Kislev, this is roughly November, December. When we get to chapter 2, we are in the month of Nisan, which is roughly March, April. So about 4 months have passed. Nehemiah has prayed. He has fasted. He has asked God to show him favor in the eyes of the king, but he is wisely patient for the right moment to speak when the voice of God leads him to speak. This is the 20th year of this king's reign. Probably it's mentioning fall dates before spring dates. Probably like a school year would begin in September and end in May. The king's reign obviously didn't begin in the first month of the year. Chapter 2, let's take a look at that and see what happens. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." So the king is discerning in this moment. He knows Nehemiah well enough to know this isn't like him. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever." Very respectful greeting. "Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Notice he answers the king's question with another question, and he doesn't name the city of Jerusalem. He says, my home. The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven. So a quick prayer, "Lord, this is it, help me." And I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers," meaning forefathers, "are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. Now, I don't think it's coincidence that the king just happens to be in the right mood. Perhaps the queen there with him was influential. We're not sure, but scholars have speculated on that. But by praying and waiting for divine guidance, Nehemiah is able to give his request to the king. The king is interested. He asks questions. And I doubt that either Nehemiah or the king realized that Nehemiah would spend most of the rest of his adult life in Jerusalem. He probably didn't ask for 12 years or 20 years initially, but that's what ends up happening. Verse 7, I also said to him, "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy." He's carefully thought this out, and he is going ahead and asking for the whole bundle, everything that he knows is going to be necessary. This is going to be a politically hot issue, especially since 100 years have passed since the first wave of exiles returned. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my request. He knows exactly why the king has said yes. So I went to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. Verse 10 of chapter 2. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed. that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. So early in this story, we have a little foreshadowing of the plot line. Sanballat and Tobiah are going to be the antagonist. They're going to go against this project that Nehemiah is trying to do. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set off during the night with a few men. This is significant. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. He knows he needs to survey this situation for himself and see exactly what he's dealing with before he makes a plea, a group plea to the people. He's definitely going to put all of his ducks in a row and not be too hasty, but be wise. It reminds me of Esther, who, when her very life was at stake, prayed and fasted 3 days and used a lot of wisdom in what she was about to do. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, now, notice as he's riding at night, he has to get off of his horse at one point or his mount and do some walking and climbing because the rubble and the disrepair is so bad. It is heartbreaking. Verse 17, then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. Notice what he did. He knew exactly what to say to them. He had surveyed the situation. He had the facts. Secondly, he let them know that this had come to him, had been impressed upon him by God. Thirdly, he had paperwork in order from the king. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Gershom the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you are doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. Nehemiah shows himself to be a great leader in being able to rally others to an important task. And as they work together, it is surprising what they are able to accomplish in spite of opposition. Whenever we have a task as a body of Christ, when he's called us and asked us to do something, what do we need? We need to hear from God and know it's from God. We need strong leadership. We need to follow as a people in unity, bathing it in prayer and being willing to follow and work hard and work together without being divided. We're living in a time of great division right now, a time that burdens me for our country and for our church. May God help us as we continue to build his kingdom.